I like to say over the story a lot. I was by a CMS Shas for a dear friend of mine, Mordechai Zimberg. And his father got up to speak at the CMS Shas, and he said over a story that it's kind of a small story. It wasn't like a huge inspirational story, but I think the message is so important. He was learning in Telz Yeshiva at the time, Moshe Zimberg, and he had started to decide that it was time to figure out the next move, a little bit of Parnasa. So he was living in one of those like government-issued square cinder block apartments on Tremaine. Anybody ever drives down Euclid, you'll see it. And he had ordered a bunch of, I think, cash register paper. That was the business that he decided to go into. He'd gotten a good deal on it, cash register paper, and he was going to get a huge delivery of it. Then he was going to go and hustle and put them in the car and try to sell off boxes to various stores or people like that, and that was the business he was going into. And he made an order, and maybe he didn't realize exactly how much he had ordered, and he gets a phone call to the Telz Yeshiva payphone right outside of the base medrash. It's his wife on the phone. The truck is here. The delivery came. So he goes rushing out from the base medrash down to his apartment, this tiny little apartment that's probably about a quarter the size of this base medrash. And there is a 18-wheeler truck full of boxes of this delivery. And he doesn't really have a choice because the truck has to unload it and he has to figure out where to put it, and you can't just leave it outside. It's something that's exposed to the elements, it's gonna get ruined. And he's thinking, what am I gonna do here? I have this apartment, I don't know how many kids he had at the time. There's no way it's gonna happen. And there's just no way, just imagine that. And he started box by box, just figuring it out. Neighbors, this. After several hours, he managed to find the spot for every single box. And then the rest is history. And he was using that as a mashal when it goes to learning Gemara, goes to learning, going through Shas. And he was talking about his son that, on his journey through Shas, that he started off with a few minutes here, an Amid here, a Blat Gemara here, a Masechta. He was using that as a mashal, is that when you look at the big task, it's absolutely impossible. Small apartment on Tremaine, an 18-wheeler full of boxes, it's absolutely impossible. But if you break it down, and you don't look at the end goal, you just say, I need to find a spot for this box. And then the next one, and the next one, people could do very, very amazing things. And you could end up getting all the way to the end. This week we talk about the building of the Mishkan. And I just jotted down 3, but there's many, many more examples. The Krushim, right? The big boards that made up the perimeter of the Mishkan building. They were very big, they were very heavy. They were so big, they were so heavy that it was not natural. It took some sort of superhuman effort to go ahead and to pick those things up and to put them into place. Not only that, with the Krushim, there were bars, brichim, bars that kept these boards, these Krushim, braced. There was a bar that went through the inside, a single bar that went through the inside of the boards, and you didn't have 4 of them, but there was one bar that went all the way around. That's humanly impossible. You can't put a bar through a board and then have it turn the corner, and then another and another, 4 corners. Humanly impossible. We know the Aron Kodesh that carried the luchos in it. The Gemara tells us that the Aron didn't or wasn't carried. There were also poles on the Aron that seemingly the Kehanim, when they would travel, they would hold the poles and they would carry the Aron. The Gemara tells us that the Aron carried the people that carried it. So you have Kehanim on this side, on that side, in the front, in the back, and yet it looks like they're carrying it, but they're not really carrying it. On the contrary, the Aron is carrying the people that carried it. It's noisei, it lifted as noisav, the people that were lifting it. Last example I jotted down is the Mizbeach, right? So we know that there was a Mizbeach that they burnt karbanos on, that they sprinkled blood on, and a fire came down from Shemayim to light the Mizbeach. And yet, the Gemara tells us, there's a mitzvah lahavi mina hedyoit. There's a mitzvah by the Mizbeach to bring fire that a person should bring it. One of the Kehanim should bring fire and light the Mizbeach. Light the fire on the Mizbeach, the log formation on the Mizbeach. What? No. Meaning as they stop. So that also seems... the people, the Kehanim, are lighting the Mizbeach, but yet there was a fire that was constantly, miraculously lit on the Mizbeach, and that descended from Shemayim. So again, one of these things that we see that there's human involvement, but when you really look closely, the human involvement is totally unnecessary. These krashim were meant to be put up by Kehanim, by Moshe Rabbeinu, and it was absolutely impossible for him to do it. The briach, this pole that went through the middle of the krashim, humanly impossible to do it, but yet the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us a mitzvah to do it. I think that the lesson, it's so relevant, it's so clear. Just going back to that story. There's so many times that we're like, I can't wake up. I can't learn. There's too many brachas to make. Well, I'm going to remember, I'm starting to say brachas now. I'm starting to say brachas every time I take a drink, every time I eat some food, I'm going to remember to take a bracha. It's such a daunting task for somebody that's not used to it. All the time, you'll remember it once, twice, and then what? There's a whole page of Gemara, small little lines, and then on the margin you got all the Rashis, even smaller little lines. I can't do it. The answer is you're right. You can't. You can't. Humanly, it was impossible to lift these krashim. It was impossible to run a pole through it. But what do we know? We know is that if you try to pick up the Aron, what's going to happen? The Aron's going to pick you up. You don't have to look at the big task. Small, well, yeah, you probably, you don't have to look at the big task. The line in front of you, that line you could do. The Rashi, those two words of Rashi, that line of Rashi, that much you could do. The piece of cake that's in your hand right now that you remember, hey, there's a bracha to be made here. That bari minei mezainis you can do. The whole big daunting task, I can't read. It's too hard. It's too many things. You're right. It's insurmountable. It's a huge mountain. It seems seemingly impossible to do. But I think the lesson that we learn over here is, even though the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to send the fire down to light the Mizbeach, there's still a mitzvah to do it by the Kehanim, that a person should bring. Even though it's impossible to lift up these krashim and to send this pole going through the middle, there's still a mitzvah to show that we're going through those motions, to try it. It's humanly impossible to fit all those boxes from the 18-wheeler into a small little cinder block apartment. But you do a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and there'll be a siyata d'shmaya. So that box in your hand, that bracha in your hand, that line of Gemara in your hand, that much you can do. That much you could put your efforts into. And what about the big picture? Don't worry about the big picture. The Rebbeinu Shalom is going to take care of the big picture. The next lesson I just want to bring out of the Mishkan, I think that's also a pretty important lesson, is that everything had very specific, exact dimensions. The Aron had to be exactly so big, and so tall, and so wide. Mizbeach had to have exact type of a shape. The menorah needed exact amount of flowers and knobs and cups on it. You can open up one of the Chumashim, you see a little picture of the menorah, what it looked like. Everything had to be done exactly so. And if anything deviated from the exact specifications, it was what? Wasn't kosher. Didn't work. Let's look at our tefillin, right? Our tefillin have to be exactly squared. They have to be totally black. If there's a speck of white on them, if it gets out of its square shape, it's not kosher. The writing in a Sefer Torah, the writing in a mezuzah. One letter is a little off. It's not kosher. Rabbi B just pointed out one of the yeshiva talesim, it's possible. Why? Because the hole is ripped and it's too close to the edge. It's too close to the edge. So it's not kosher anymore. Why does this really matter so much? I have my talis, I have my tefillin, I built the Mishkan, I did it as good as I can, I tried, but I fell short of the specifications. A person says a bracha and he forgets to say Elokeinu or Melech. It's not a kosher bracha. You have to make the bracha again. What do you mean? I remembered I made a bracha. I said Bari Minei Mezainis. No, but you skipped Shem Hashem. You skipped the word Melech. It doesn't work. Why are we so into having things so precise, so exact, that we really just need to always follow the rule book? So I've said this a few times, but I think it's super important. Rav Hirsch writes this. He says that if we don't have a rule book, if we don't have exact directions and exact specifications that we need to adhere to, that if we get it, we've got it, and if we don't get it, we fall short and it's not kosher, it's possible. So then we're leaving ourselves open for all the human interpretation that exists out there. I had a conversation with Rabbi Meisels. His Zaidi needs a refuah shlema. He's very sick, but he's an old man, and he lived a long life, and he lived a very successful life. He taught probably thousands and thousands of Talmidim, and he wrote curriculum when nobody else was doing it. And he was a master in so many areas of Torah. He is a master in so many areas of Torah. Also just a very pleasant person to have a schmooze with. So let's say there'd be a doctor out there that said, well, how old is your age?
99.
99. The man is 99. He lived for 99 years. He lives for 99 years, and Mir Hashem, he should live for another 50. Or however many. So let's say a doctor would decide, you know what, I'm taking this into my own hands. I'm making a decision over here. He's got such a beautiful mishpacha, so many children and grandchildren. He's accomplished so much. He's accomplished more than most 10 people put together would accomplish. I'm making a decision over here. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to stop giving him fluids. I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop that. A decision that's not based on Torah, but it's based on his moral compass. If we don't have a rule book from the Rabbeinu Shalom that comes from Shamayim, that's divine, that we know is absolutely emes, so then things are going to change so drastically. Anybody could decide what they want to do, and they could decide, well, this is the moral decision. Think about who's that guy that everybody was talking about yesterday, right? And if he wakes up tomorrow and he decides to take this type of a position on this issue, or a different position on a different issue, if these things are going to be our moral compass, if we don't have something that's absolute from Shamayim that says, if you did it this way, you're good, and if you fell short, so then you fell short and it's no good. So that we're leaving ourselves up to every single whim, every single wind that flies through the world. I don't think you have to go to what's acceptable as far as how people identify as human beings, or men or women, or what's okay and what's not okay. Because some Michiganer that can't get from his car to his front door unless he's doped up on enough medication to kill a small horse, what he has, which is just about every single celebrity and movie actor out there. Especially. But we're leaving ourselves open to so much stupidity. We're leaving ourselves open to such a non-consistent at whim of whatever it is that somebody decided to come up with that day. I think that's an important lesson that we learn from the Mishkan, that the dimensions have to be so, And it's like that with all the mitzvahs we do, and it's like that with everything that we do. We look at the rule book. We got a rule book from the Rebbeinu Shalom. It has to look like this. If it hits that, it hits that. If it doesn't, it doesn't. What do you mean? I kind of made the bracha. My tefillin are almost perfect. It doesn't work that way. It has to be exactly the way the Rebbeinu Shalom did it, and if it's not that way, we're opening up ourselves to such a world of confusion, to such a world of where what this person says, what that person says, whatever the common winds are, whatever the socio-political agenda of whoever it is that's in charge is. If we've been around this long, and we will continue to be around this long, we have to have an absolute rule book that comes from Rebbeinu Shalom, exactly how to do it. And I think that's the lesson from all these very, very specific dimensions that we have.